Both myself and Amalia from the UK SYP team have organised this event, and we hope it's useful and insightful for everyone. So before we get started, let me give you a quick breakdown of how we will run this webinar. So I'll ask our brilliant panelists to introduce themselves shortly, and then we'll have the main discussion, and then lastly we'll open the floor for questions from the audience. So if you do have any questions, send them through the chat and we'll do our best to cover them all. The entire event should last about an hour. We don't want to eat into everyone's Monday evening. So onto the panel, we have Lyndsey Mayhew, Ben Booth and Jeannelle Brew. So can I ask you to all introduce yourselves, starting with Lyndsey, please?
Hi everyone. Yeah, my name is Lyndsey Mayhew. I am the Sales and Marketing Director at Trigger Publishing, where we are a mental health and wellbeing publisher. My background is I've been working in publishing and media in some form or another for about 20 years. Makes me feel super old. I started off in newspapers and worked in magazines and book publishing, and I've worked in everything from publicity, marketing, and now I have a sort of a role now which covers sales, market and publicity at Trigger. And yeah, really pleased to be able to talk to you tonight and answer any of your questions that you might have.
Thanks, Lyndsey. Jeannelle?
Yeah, I'm Jeannelle. I'm a marketing assistant at HarperCollins. I work with like the fiction titles. And before that, I did a year-long traineeship at Hachette. I did 6 months in publicity with Hodder and 6 months in editorial. So I'm relatively like new to the game.
Brilliant, thanks Jeannelle. Ben?
Hi there, so I'm Ben Booth. I work for Edward Elgar, which is an independent academic publisher. A bit like Lyndsey, I've been in publishing for about 20 years, and similarly, that makes me feel a little bit old addressing a society of young publishers, but hopefully I'll have something useful to say, so looking forward to the evening.
Okay, brilliant, thanks guys. So to start our discussion, we felt it would be really useful to get your insights on the topic more generally. So you're all working in different roles and you're at different stages in your career. How do you feel mental health, well-being and work-life balance have been addressed throughout your career in publishing?
Shall I kick off on that?
Yeah.
So this really got me thinking, this question, like really made me delve back all those years as well, like to the early days. And I think the answer is really mixed. And in some cases, you know, it's kind of given me a bit of made me feel a bit sad about actually how it is dealt with maybe longer ago. But certainly I would say now, and in the current job that I have and in the industry now, I think things are addressed much, much better. We're much more aware of mental health as a society, as we should be. And thanks to a lot of campaigns through the government and, you know, the world we live in, that we are much more aware of how to take care of our mental health. And obviously with me working in mental health and wellbeing books, which is a passion subject for me, it always has been since I was a teenager. You know, I'm able to work in a area of the business that I really love. But looking back, gosh, I can honestly say there's been some shockers over the years, particularly in some roles I was in a few years ago, you know, where it was basically, you know, whoever stays late is the winner, you know, and I think the culture now is much more different to that now. And I think that really is a really good step. And we care a lot more about our colleagues, I think. I mean, I always worry that I'm living in a bit of an echo chamber because I work in mental health publishing. And I'd be interested to see if other people don't think that. But I do think it has changed much more for the better. And it's only going to get better, I hope.
That's great. Thanks, Lyndsey. Ben, how do you feel things have changed?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. I think I've noticed a lot of changes just in the last few years. So in our firm, for instance, we have been training people to be mental health first aiders. So I'm one of those for Elgar. And in fact, we have, for the number of staff we have, I think we have quite a good number. So I think that shows a willingness by the company to take an extra step to make sure that actually it's thinking about mental health, and it's making sure that there are ways and means of people feeling able to access a degree of support. And I think it's very hard to imagine that having happened 10 or 15 years ago. I think, you know, the issue of mental health just wasn't on people's agendas in the same way. And I think if you go back even further in the mists of time, I think, you know, it would have been right off the agenda. I think people would have been scratching their heads if you were trying to raise it as an issue. There would have been much more of a sense of, you know, getting a grip and getting on with your job. So I think it's very interesting that even just within the last couple of years, there's definitely been, you know, a tangible change in the attitudes and approach towards mental health support. And then, of course, the timing is very interesting when you think about the COVID pandemic hitting just at the point where actually this has become a major issue for everybody. You know, I know we'll come on to that in a little bit, but right at this moment, I feel ever so glad actually that we were in a position where we were perhaps better prepared than we would have been 2 or 3 years ago, is maybe the best way to put it, to help people feel supported through that process.
No, thanks, Ben. Jeannelle, I know that you're a year into your career, I think.
Yeah.
So have you got any insights, or do you think, you know, have you observed anything in your career so far?
I feel like, yeah, nothing's changed, but for me, like, that's a positive. It's been like great everywhere I've been. I've had really supportive managers and like really supportive people on my team. Like, yes, I think people are a lot more like confident and comfortable to speak about like their mental health. And if it's like really bad, I feel like I can speak to my manager about it. Previously, when I was at Orion, I just had like a really like tough time. And I was given like a week off. It wasn't like this huge, like big discussion, which was great. I felt like really comfortable and confident. I didn't have the whole like, if you work late, like you're a better like employee. That was kind of looked down upon and like strongly advised against. So yeah, it's been great so far.
Yeah, that's really good to hear that that's the case, because when I was, say, about 10 or 15 years ago, it really was, dare I say, in the 80s, there used to be this sort of like, you know, sort of sleepers for wimps kind of culture that we kind of grew up with, particularly if you're probably from Ben and I's generation, of Generation X, which is like, you know, you work hard, you play hard, which we do. But as a result, there was this whole thing of, you know, the longer you work, the better you are and the more likely you are to go up the career ladder. And I have to say, in my role now, and I'd say particularly in my role before I worked at Crimson Publishing, it was really non-existent, and it really made me really happy that that was not the culture there. And it's good to hear, Jeannelle, you saying that about big publishers as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, that's brilliant. When I was thinking about this particular discussion point, this will make Ben laugh because we used to work together. But I recalled how I felt about traveling at the start of my commissioning career. And actually, in terms of mental health and well-being, I didn't quite realize at the time how much negative self-talk I had towards myself, because I was so crippled by fear about travel, and I kept it to myself. And it was only until, you know, okay, 2 weeks, we're going to be flying to Oslo, that I sort of brought it up to Ben, and it was perfectly fine. I felt supported, but it was that period before where I think if you feel that you're on your own in a certain situation, you tend not to talk about it because you feel like you're the only person going through it. But once I opened up, you know, it was a really good thing for mine and Ben's relationship as we were working together. And I learned to develop some positive self-talk as well, which was really good. But when I look back to that first experience and how frightened I was in comparison to last year, for example, when I was on flights all the time, going to countries where they didn't speak English, I was a completely different person. But I think it's really important to feel that you're in the right environment where, you know, you feel that you can talk. And obviously from Lyndsey and Ben's perspective, things have changed quite significantly over time. For that particular trip, travel was not the biggest issue. I got food poisoning on the first night that we were in Oslo, so I had bigger issues to contend with. But moving on to the next point. So the next point is around mentoring. So as mentors and mentees, do you feel that your conversations about well-being, work-life balance and mental health have changed or increased this year especially? Are there any practices that you've developed that you think others could potentially adopt? Ben, let's start with you, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I think absolutely, undoubtedly, those conversations have changed this year. I mean, how could they not have changed with all of the changes in working practices and working arrangements and just the general stresses and difficulties that so many people are having to face in their own personal lives that are affecting the way that they approach their work. And I think, you know, as more senior staff members, you know, if you sort of use that phrase of mentors, you know, obviously there are people who you sort of have a direct working relationship with and you're interested in their well-being. Yes, absolutely, those conversations have definitely changed because the things that people are having to deal with have been so immense. You know, I think for some people, the challenges of working from home have been unexpected. And I think that really applies a lot to younger single people, you know, especially people maybe who are either in a flat by themselves and during the lockdown were completely isolated, or those, you know, we had a couple of new starters just within the weeks before the lockdown started who I believe were then, you know, had set themselves up to share a house somewhere, but with people they probably didn't know, and suddenly were all locked in together. And what's more, in those houses or flats, you know, probably didn't have a very good working space, or maybe were having to work from a dressing table in their bedroom or something like this that was incredibly, you know, placing a lot of pressure onto people. And so I think the difficulties people were facing in terms of handling the situation that they were in and yet also trying to do their work meant that conversations we were having to have about anxiety, about you know, loneliness, about a sense of isolation, about people feeling as if they were engaged with their work, you know, those were very different conversations from the ones you might have if everybody was coming into the office every day. So I think in terms of, you know, thinking about this question of, you know, what sort of practices we developed and, you know, how perhaps we dealt with that, I think, you know, we had to think on our feet, certainly as a mental health team within our company. You know, as I mentioned earlier, we had several people who were trained to a degree in mental health first aid. For those who don't know, there's a sort of a mental health first aid foundation, which provides accredited training courses, and there are 3 grades of training: a half day, a full day, and a 2-day course. And a lot of us have done the 1-day course, which makes us a mental health first aid champion. So the group of us who had that training got together and began to meet at first sort of weekly and later sort of fortnightly during the sort of 6-month period over the summer, just to sort of swap notes a bit on how we could support the people around us. Now, I don't think that was happening before we were thrust into the situation of the lockdown. And so it's quite interesting to think about taking some of that positive benefit forward, about us being in touch as a team, supporting each other as a team, swapping notes a little bit, you know, obviously without, you know, sharing details or breaching confidence, but just swapping notes a little bit about how we can support other colleagues who are around us. So I think there are definitely useful things that we've learned from going through a very intense period of time.
No, thanks, Ben. That's really interesting. And I bet when you did that mental health training, you didn't think you'd be called into action in quite the way that you were.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, I think when we did it, as I say, looking back now, it seems very fortuitous that quite a good number of us had this training relatively recently. Whereas, as I say, if this pandemic had happened 2 or 3 years earlier, I think we would have been struggling a lot more to know how to deal with it. We'd have still been in a position of trying to support each other, but without perhaps the useful information that we received from that training and some of the frameworks which help you to support other people in an appropriate way.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Lyndsey, Jeannelle, have you got anything to add to that point?
What was the initial question? Was it about mentee and mentor?
Yeah. Do you want me to read it out again?
Beginning bit again, just I was kind of so engaged in what Ben was saying.
Yes. Okay, so as mentors, but also mentees, do you feel that your conversations around well-being, work-life balance and mental health have changed or increased, especially this year? Are there any practices that you've developed that you think others could potentially adopt?
Yeah, so I think I obviously echo everything that Ben was saying about things have changed, and we're asking different questions to our colleagues now. I've always been a really keen mentor of the more junior members of my team, and I really enjoy managing people and working with them. So I've always encouraged a really open conversation, and generally people are willing to have that with me. And whether that's talking about what's going on at work, or if they want to, what's going on in their personal life, any troubles with that, because I really believe that you can't be happy at work if you're not happy at home. And as in, obviously not without going, if they're not comfortable talking about that, but it's just talking about things like simple things like, how are you finding getting into work? Are you managing with XX? Because when you work with people, you see them more than you see your family, don't you, or partners and close people to you. So it's really always been really important to me to really develop relationships with people that I work with, so that you can have those conversations. And I mean, I think, like I said, generally I've worked in publishing is quite a soft industry to work in, so people tend to be quite sort of touchy-feely in my experience, and in particular in the sort of publishers I've worked in before, and they become your friends as well, and you care about them. I think a big thing is always being able to talk to your manager, and be able to feel that you can phone them up at any time, whether that's obviously mainly during the work week, and just say, can I have a chat? And just being able to identify that other people have other stuff going on. They might have elderly relatives, or they might have someone who is sick, or they might, I think at the beginning of lockdown, everyone went full flung into, let's do Zoom parties, let's do Zoom quizzes. And now, 6 or however many months on it is, we're I feel worse than probably did at the beginning, because there's not all that kind of extra support, is there? We're just kind of trying to just get on with it now and live our everyday life. So I think it's important to check in. And one thing I presume everyone does as well, this is where we work at Trigger, is we have weekly Zoom calls where we all check in. We're not a massive team, so it's quite an easy thing to do, but we make sure that there's time for a little bit of a laugh on it. We're not just all there just to talk about work, because just being able to get together and chat and just form those relationships that you normally form in the office is so important for your mental health, because your colleagues are hopefully people that you like and you get on with. Not always, but generally they're people who've got a shared interest with you. And for me, I mean, I think my colleagues always find me I love talking about books that I've read and TV adaptations I've watched. So I'm always willing to have a conversation about that. But it's about not always having to think we have to focus on work at these times. We need to, even if we're having a Zoom, talk about other stuff that's going on, or, family things. And if someone's little kid comes on, bring them to the front, because, that person, the mums and the dads, they're the people who, like the single people, I really believe in that too, have been really affected by this. And yeah, it's just, you just got to help everyone get through it, haven't you? I also think that, actually, I said this right at the beginning of lockdown, is I really think in 10 years time, the people we work with now are the people who are going to say, who were you with during COVID? Where did you work during COVID? And it'll be that sense of camaraderie that you can look back, hopefully, depending on how this all pans out, and just say that they were my people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Jeannelle, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I guess I'm not a mentor, I'm a mentee. So with my mentor, I guess 70 to 30% of our chats are based on mental health and well-being. I don't think it would have been like that before the pandemic. I'm not 100% sure, because I didn't have a mentor before. But I love her, I'm obsessed with her, I think she's amazing. But she literally says to take care of yourself, you're the only one thing that you have and that you own. And if you're like feeling rough, like that's absolutely fine. Like let someone know if you can. Don't like beat yourself up about it. Like you need to take care of you, and everything else is secondary. We spend like maybe 30 minutes just talking about like mental health and well-being before like talking about goals and like work stuff. So I think it's more of a priority now. One thing that I do is like organize my emails into like folders and stuff. And I've got a folder which is called Jay, you've got this. And it's like a bunch of like emails, just like from people in my company, saying something that I've done well, or like, I don't know, like just gassing me up, like just making me feel good. And like, it could be about like a really big project. It could be like, just like a line. I got like a line from someone saying like they're just so glad that I joined the company. And like that's so nice. And so sometimes when you're feeling like really overwhelmed, just, I don't know, create a little folder, organize all the praise, all the amazing things that you've accomplished, and like just flick through it. And yeah, I'd say putting yourself first and just being honest. So like checking in with yourself if you feel off, and if you can, like tell someone in your team, like, I'm not saying I can't work today, I just feel like really off. Is it okay if I can like rearrange this deadline, or can I like do this tomorrow, or whatever it is? And like that's okay, and not being scared or shy or whatever to do that, because yeah, you're all you've like got, and you come first. Like we work with books, do you know what I mean? Like no one's gonna die if you miss a deadline. Like it feels like that, but we're not like a doctor or like a surgeon or like
wise words, Jeannelle. I think that's really wise. You're right. What's the worst that can happen, right?
Yeah. That's a classic line, isn't it? Yeah. I love that.
Iram, I don't know if you remember, there was one of our colleagues used to have the saying, "It's only books," and I think you know, I always have that ringing in my head, even after you know all these years. It's and it's a really good maxim to keep in mind.
Yeah, I agree.
I'd forgotten actually until Jeannelle said, but I also have an email folder, and it's called the boosting box.
Ooh.
And if anyone ever says anything good to me, I always put it in that box. But I have to say, I never look in it. I just need to wait for some dark times and then have a little look at it. But yeah, that's a really good idea about having like a positive thing to be able to reflect on. I was also going to say as well, I think someone told me, one of my colleagues actually, she said to me, and this is such great advice for this time, she said, go where your energy flows. So we're all hardworking people, and some days you just can't bust it out as much as you might do the next day. So just do the jobs that you can do that day. That might just be going through your email. That might just be some quiet work, some reading, because tomorrow you might be like on it completely, like bish bash bosh. But just take care of yourself and don't beat yourself up because today you're not feeling like, you know, on fire, because tomorrow you will be.
I think that's really important, and it's true, isn't it, that age old, it's books, no one's gonna die. That's really important to keep in mind. And I really love that you've both got some sort of a folder where you keep that positivity. Lyndsey, yours is probably overflowing, and that's why you're like, oh, I can't get to it now. But I've actually written that down. I think I'm going to do that tomorrow when I log back on to my emails. Okay, so the next point, it links a little bit to the point that we've just covered. So we'll do this one really briefly, but it's around changing times. So if COVID hadn't happened, what do you feel were the main issues that were prevalent in the industry, in terms of mental health, well-being, work-life balance? And then on the flip side to that, what new issues do you think have been highlighted as a result of lockdown and adapting to the new ways of working? Ben?
Sure. Okay. Well, I think what's interesting with COVID is to distinguish perhaps between some of the things that it's revealed and some of the things it's created. And I think, you know, we've talked about different types of people in different types of circumstance, and you know, two in particular that have been mentioned are perhaps younger single people, and also then parents trying to deal with children. And I think in my own situation, I've got 2 boys, they're 7 and 10, and I think for this sort of 6-month period from when they were sent home from school before Easter through until they restarted at the beginning of September, you know, it was a very long period of trying to juggle, you know, working from home, and my wife was also working from home, and we had 2 boys who were very good, but increasingly getting tetchy, being around the house with no social interaction and no friends. And at the same time, ladled on top of that, we were meant to be somehow supervising their teaching. You know, I felt very stressed by that situation. That was a situation that was created by COVID, and it was also a temporary one, because now that they're back at school, you know, that stress to a large extent of trying to all be in the same house has gone away, and the stresses that they were feeling have gone away, which then are reflected onto me whilst I'm trying to work. But the other thing that COVID has done, of course, is reveal some of the things that were there anyway. And I think one of the things that's become apparent is perhaps, especially talking to some of the other sort of peer supporters, is how, you know, I think it's interesting thinking about the types of people that sometimes work in publishing firms. And it was interesting, you know, hearing what Lyndsey said about maybe some people being slightly more touchy-feely. I often think, and I don't know if Iram, if you concur with this, but I think our business as a scholarly publisher has probably a slight weighting towards people who are a little bit bookish, shall we say. And I put myself in that category. That's not a derogatory term, but I think, you know, people who do tend to be perhaps slightly quieter, slightly more introverted, studious, people who hold themselves to high standards and perhaps feel a degree of anxiety about whether or not they're meeting those sorts of standards. And I think what's become apparent is there were probably more people dotted around our business struggling with feelings of anxiety, and probably doing so in a very introverted way by themselves. And the pressure of the COVID situation has perhaps brought that into the light a bit more and helped us to be able to acknowledge that and support them, and perhaps be a little bit more consistent and strategic in how we support people and how we encourage people to you know, seek out some ways for themselves that they can, you know, depending on what sort of situation people are in. You know, some people need you know, some resources that will help them a little bit. Other people maybe need more structured and professional support, and so the way in which we can direct people depends a little bit on the situation they're in. So I'm very careful using that phrase. Somebody corrected me the other day when I talked about ways that people can help themselves, because not everybody is able or feels in a place to help themselves. But you know, some people do, and others need a little bit more direction, encouragement, and support. So I think for me that was an interesting revelation, that people who you thought were okay because they kept quiet, they kept a lid on things, they kept themselves a little bit, actually perhaps were struggling inside, were feeling a bit insecure, were feeling anxious about how they were doing, even though from the outside you would say you're doing fine. But it's perhaps brought that to light, I think.
That's really interesting. And you're right, until things, you know, such as COVID, it could have been anything really, when your foundations are rocked a little bit, things will come to light, and you know, you crack the surface on different issues that you probably wouldn't have done if everything had stayed at the status quo. So Jeannelle, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so like the first part of your question, for me personally, like obviously I'm a Black woman, so one of my like issues, I guess, with being in the office was like microaggressions, and being like, seeing myself as I see myself and as like the white people in the office would see me. So can I say certain things? Can I wear certain things? Can I, like, I don't know, like I feel like with my emails I'm overly jolly, like hella exclamation marks, because I don't want to be seen as like, oh, that rude, like Black girl in the office. With like social events, I have like really bad social anxiety, so sometimes like declining things would make me feel like really bad, and maybe like, oh, they think I hate them, what if they hate me, like just having all these worries. And I guess, yeah, commuting, but like now I'm not really like bothered about the microaggressions and stuff, because I guess I'm at home. And I feel like work feels a lot more personal, I guess, because I'm working from my room, like I'm working from my house. So like work's really like home for me. And dealing with issues such as like Black Lives Matter and like the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, like I'm going to feel that a lot more because I'm at home and I don't have that like separation between going to work and like coming home and stuff. I guess another issue brought about like COVID would be maybe if you're new to the team,
Yeah,
like you can't hear like the office jokes, or like you can't, like you're not by like your teammates, you're alone and like at home, and I guess you feel even more isolated. Yeah, being junior, I like initially at first I sat right next to my manager, so I could be like, does this look okay? Does this sound okay? Can you help me with this? And I could just like hear things and learn that way. But I struggled like at first a lot with like not hearing conversations and not being able to like turn my computer desk around, my computer screen, and be like, can you like look at this? Does it look okay? And like, yeah, being like just new to marketing anyways, having to learn things kind of on my own or through like sharing screens, like it was kind of hard to navigate. I guess like, yeah, those are the main things for me, I would
yeah.
say.
No, I completely get that. I was relatively new to my job, and we went into lockdown. And you're right, unless, you know, it's completely different, isn't it, when you're interacting with people around you and you can have those really informal, quick tap on the shoulder, can I ask you a quick question,
Mm-hmm.
in comparison to putting an email together to say, can you please show me how to do this? So yeah, I think I really sympathize with that. And yeah, it's incredible how much you can take for granted when you're in the office environment. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I used to sit in an office next door to Ben, and you know what we used to do when we had phone calls with authors was we'd close our door, and then people in the main office knew that we were on a call, so it would quieten down a bit. And you miss, I feel like I miss those nuances to the environment, whereas at home I live with my family, so I can close the door but I can still hear what's going on, just jabbering away in the next room. Don't you understand what it means when I close the door?
Yeah.
So yeah, so thanks, Jeannelle. Lyndsey, have you got anything?
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear what Jeannelle's saying there about being a relatively new or maybe junior member of the team during this situation, because I do think it's extremely challenging for anyone who is maybe just new into publishing or a graduate or just someone who's new into the new job, because you know the reason you come into a company is that you want that guidance and support from a mentor and a manager. And we recruited somebody new through one of our colleagues left to go on maternity during lockdown, and as a result we recruited someone who was a junior person in a junior role, and I'm her manager, and I'm very conscious that I want to phone her every day and just say, you know, like I said before, hey, how's it going? You know, you're at home, you know, she, you know, lives with her family, and, you know, but just reaching out, because starting a new job in this situation is really weird, isn't it? And it is, you know, having managed lots of people in the past, it is that thing about turning your computer around and going, is that right? Am I doing it right? And overhearing stuff. And I've always said that when you're new to a company, and that's why I think independent publishing is really good, or small businesses, because you get involved in a lot of parts of the publishing rather than in a big publisher. Maybe the marketing team might be in another part of the city, or, you know, everything's in the same room. So I really recognize how tricky that is and challenging. And I hope anyone who's in that situation has got a good manager who is checking in with them, and, you know, and just being able to, I really think it just needs to be more emphasis on like just being like human beings in the workplace, which I think there is. And I take on board those comments, what Ben was saying about academic publishing is quite different probably to what I do, because I used to work at a publisher where a pin would drop, and me, the marketing and salesperson, used to feel like I was a bit noisy being on the phone all the time. But yeah, it's different people, isn't it? And it's really fascinating. And But I think if you feel isolated at home, which undoubtedly some people will do, you know, make sure as well you are, for example, getting exercise, you know, arranging to like meet up either social distance or have a call with a friend after work. It's particularly if you're not living with your family, or your family can do your head in, can't they? You know, you're desperate probably to get away from them at the end of the day, just being in the same house. But it is really challenging, but ask for help. And that's the big thing that has changed is there's no, I hope, and I'm saying this from my own perspective, there's no stigma for asking for help and saying, can I talk to you? Can I have 5 minutes? Never be afraid to do that. And I think if a manager wasn't up for that, you know, even if they said, oh, not now, but, you know, let's book a time in. Like one thing I'm always very conscious to do is if a junior member of my team asks to have a call or arrange a call with them, you know, the house would have to burn down before I cancelled it, because you don't want to make them feel as if they're not important to you, because they are important. And ultimately, I always say this, you'll be employing me one day if you're so good. So I want to stay on your good side. You know, there's plenty of people that I've managed over the years who are now absolutely zooming through their careers. And I think, oh, better stay on their good side, you know, because one day they'll be the boss of my publishing company or something. But, you know, in all seriousness, you know, there's some super talented people out there. And why wouldn't you want them to feel happy in life? Because if they're happy in life, they're happy in work, and then they'll do a good job. So yeah, just making sure people are happy. It sounds so simple, but my experience in other companies years ago, it means, you know, it's not always as it is. So
that was great. Thank you, Lyndsey. I'm just mindful of the time, so I think if we have our last point, our last discussion point, and then we've got a few questions that have come through. If there are any more, send them through the chat function and we'll try and cover them. But on to the last point of our main discussion, looking to the future, do you think the industry will continue to change and evolve as a result of what's happened this year? Do you see it leaning towards a more mindful approach towards workers and readers? And lastly, this is more for the trade side, will there be a change in reading habits as a result of everything that's gone on this year? So Jeannelle, I might start with you if that's okay.
I guess, yeah, like I said before, I feel like the line between personal and like work or whatever has like kind of faded. So I feel like, so again, I'll just bring to example, like with the whole Black Lives Matter movement, I think the fact that we're all like at home and we're all on socials and like reading the news like all the time, it's not a thing where people don't know what's going on anymore, and like they can't like feign ignorance. And like I've noticed that in like my company, we speak a lot more about like race and diversity. Like when certain things like happened, for example, with like the whole SARS protesting in like Nigeria and stuff, loads of people from my team reached out and like messaged, like if you want like a call or whatever. I'm not going to understand like 100% of what this is, but if you just want like to run or like you just want to offload, like I'm like defo here. If you want to have like a virtual coffee or tea, like that's also fine. I don't think that would have happened if we weren't in lockdown and like working from home. I feel like there would have been like, yeah, that line, like I'm not sure I can talk to Jeannelle about that because like that's like a Black thing. I don't want to say like the wrong thing. But I think, yeah, working from home has made me a lot closer to people like in my team, and we can have certain conversations. And I feel empowered to have certain conversations with more like senior people, because yeah, like if I'm not happy, I'm not gonna do well, and I'm gonna tweet about it. People who wanna like potentially work for us are gonna see, and they probably might like not want to work here. And like, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I feel like it's changed in that way. We're able to have more honest conversations, and kind of move away, I guess, from just talking about race and stuff. Like I've seen people act a lot more, and maybe because yeah, like of this year, people are like just so fed up with like people just talking, especially in our industry. Like we chat like a lot, and I feel like we are quite slow, but we are making progress, and we are like making steps in the right direction. So yeah.
No, thanks, Jeannelle. I think that's really, you've summed it up perfectly there, that there is progress. It might not feel like it's happening instantly and overnight, but because there are more honest conversations, it's helping push things in the right direction, definitely. Lyndsey, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I concur with everything Jeannelle just said. Yeah, it is so interesting, isn't it? And I think as well from a publishing perspective, you know, there's a lot of big names now, a lot of books, you know, you've got Mac Haig's, Bryony Gordon's, people who are talking about things like well-being, like Fern Cotton, who people recognise, you know, and there are some names like that who are much more vocal on Twitter, and you see a lot of it. So they encourage you as well to have conversations around this, don't they? Which is really good. But from a perspective from my company as well, like, you know, we are, you know, we're really tuned into, you know, issues that are going on. You know, our workforce is like diverse as well. And it's really important to us to make sure we are publishing and working with people, you know, from all different kind of ethnicities as well. And I think that has become much easier because we've been able to have a bigger conversation about it, haven't we? And it's been prompted more at work, which is good. Like, for example, we've got a book coming out next year, which is about, you know, about it's for young people. It's about being beautiful in all shapes, sizes, colors, whatever you are, you're beautiful. And it's just so fun to work on because, you know, these are real people and, you know, we're talking about real issues. And from something you said there as well, Jeannelle, about we're talking, one positive thing that's come out of it is we're talking to our colleagues a lot more face to face like this. Like before, you might have had a 20-minute meeting or you might have caught up on the phone, but now we're eyeball to eyeball more often. And I think, you know, we're talking to people more, and I find that is really good for morale. And there's a lot of positives that's come out of it. There's obviously a lot of negatives, but positives like, you know, people aren't exhausted by commuting, people are saving money by not having to commute, and people are able to, you know, spend more time doing things that are better for their well-being, such as doing exercise more because perhaps they're home more than they wouldn't normally be. I think there's lots of positives. So yeah, I hope, I'm confident that it will continue. I think the publishing industry is an absolutely brilliant industry to work in. I love it, and I love the diversity of it. And for anyone that is, you know, keen on, well, we said at the beginning, like buying mental health books, you know, I'm very keen for that to happen in the future, because more people that buy mental health books, the better for people who are publishing mental health books, right? So
and better for society more generally, Lyndsey.
Yeah, it's a bigger conversation. It's people
Yeah.
aren't too scared to talk about it, which is brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose just thinking about that question, do you think the industry will continue to change and evolve? Well, I mean, I think what was interesting was, you know, I can only obviously talk about my own experience, but the fact that we had already made a shift towards greater awareness and acknowledgement of mental health issues in the workplace before COVID. And all I can think is that the effects of the pandemic will have absolutely reinforced how important and worthwhile that was, and hopefully mean that it's something which is continues on a trajectory of being taken seriously into the future, as opposed to perhaps something which is a bit of an experiment, and maybe people watch it wither away because we didn't put it into practice. So, as I say, I can only speak for my, you know, the company that I work for, but I would hope that other people's experiences have been similar, and that, you know, it's raised an awareness both at an organisational level, in terms of the way that we sort of support all of our colleagues across the business as an organisation, but also on that individual level, as you say, those individual kinds of conversations, you know, as Jeannelle was explaining and describing, between different people who you work alongside. You know, I think that's a very interesting thing, and that's something which you can't necessarily sort of organise and orchestrate. But I think it's you know, it would be great to see that as a trend that continues in a positive way once the dust settles on the current situation.
No, that's great. Thank you, Ben. So that's a wrap for our main discussion. We've had about 6 questions come through from the audience. So I'm going to start with the first one that came through from Claudia. So hi Claudia, hope you're well. So Claudia asks, please, what does a mental health first aider do and how do you get trained? I work in education and I think this would be beneficial for me and colleagues as well as students. And then as a side comment, I would really like to highlight the importance of giving and sharing good things as a way of self-therapy. It has worked for me and I believe it's a really strong tool nowadays. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Claudia. So I think that first part is probably for you, Ben. So what does a mental health first aider do and how do you get trained?
Sure, great question. One of the reasons I mentioned it is because I think it is a scheme which is really worthwhile, and I think it's something which is accessible. So, as I say, there's a mental health first aid foundation which designs and accredits the schemes for mental health first aid training. And then there are a number of providers. So I did mine through St John's Ambulance. In fact, the same training centre we use for our normal first aid courses. And I think that's part of the way in which certainly organisations like St John's are trying to pitch this as being something that is equal in status and equal in importance in the workplace, alongside the sort of, I want to say normal first aid. That's the wrong way of phrasing, isn't it? Lyndsey will pick me up on that. Lyndsey, do you have a better way other than normal? What can I say?
I guess like physical
yeah.
traditional first aid.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, okay. Practical first aid, I suppose. So yes, you know, but certainly equal in status, equal in worth, alongside the first aid that we're more used to seeing in the workplace. There are three courses you can do. There's a half-day one, which I think makes you mental health first aid aware. There's a full-day one, which is the one I've done, which makes you a mental health first aid champion. And then there's a 2-day course, which makes you a mental health first aider in full. So we have 2 people who've done the 2-day course and 6 or 7 of us who've done the 1-day course. So I think it's very easy to look up if you're interested in finding out more about the courses. And I think, you know, you can read up through MHFA. I think it's mhfa.org is their main website. Or, as I say, look up through St John's and other providers to find out maybe how to access a course that's near to you. In terms of what they do, you know, there's a lot of content in the course, I suppose, about being aware of mental health issues and breaking down some of the stigmas that maybe people have carried forward from the past. There's training on being aware of appropriate ways of talking to and engaging with people who have different issues. And, you know, a lot to do with the 1-day course is about awareness rather than perhaps being a fully trained professional in how to deal with these issues. So there's information on signposting. We get sent away with a really good manual at the end that's got a lot of information for helplines and further support for people who perhaps need more serious support with the issues that they're facing.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Ben. So we've got another question, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Wajia Rana. So if you find yourself struggling with your mental health, what advice could you give about how to bring the conversation up at work? Also, Jeannelle mentioned taking a week off work, and Ben mentioned having had mental first aiders at work. What other practical options are there in the workplace to support those who are struggling with their mental health, and how accessible are they? So Jeannelle, do you want to cover that one?
Yeah, I guess my first thing would be to speak to your manager. It doesn't need to be this huge, serious thing. Everyone has mental health, and if you feel like your mental health is getting bad or is quite bad, it is important to raise, because it's just like physical health. So I think maybe dropping your manager a line. I don't know if you have Teams, but it's really informal. It doesn't need to be this long email. you could say, hey, could we have like 5 minutes, a quick call? I'm feeling a bit rough, or I'm not feeling like myself, and I need XYZ, if you know what you need. And like that way they can't be like, no, because you said like, this is my body, this is how I feel, and this is what I need, and I'm just telling you. If you're not sure what you need, like, you can have a conversation. They've probably got like experience in this as well. If you don't feel comfortable speaking to your manager, maybe HR, or like, yeah, maybe there's like we have like a helpline that you can speak to, but yeah, manager, HR, or someone that you're quite close to on your team, maybe they can like help you bring up the topic to your manager. But I guess the main thing is just communicating. Don't like just sit, because it will get worse, and then you're going to feel awful and you're not going to do well, and people are going to pick up on that, and then it's just not good. Like, just speak up.
Can I just say, from a manager's point of view, I think that's amazing advice, and exactly what she said is completely right. And I think one thing it's really difficult, because people will be out there thinking, but will my manager listen? I don't get on with my manager particularly well. I don't know if I have that relationship with him or her. And I think, as Jeannelle said, it doesn't have to be your manager. It could be another trusted person who is maybe a work colleague, maybe someone who's more senior to you. But what I would really highly recommend, from my manager's perspective, is don't just suffer in silence or take 6 days off without, I know it's super hard, but to make some sort of explanation what it's about, or say it's something else, because it's very difficult for people to, in an honest situation, it's the workplace, you have to, basically, I had an example a few years ago where there was someone who just kept taking lots and lots of time off, and I suspected it was mental health, and she wouldn't really engage in the conversation, but I really wish she had, because if you're upfront from the beginning, people can be supported. And like we've talked about today, it is a conversation that I'd be surprised if any manager wasn't willing to have, or to go to someone else like a mentor, but try not to take time off without an explanation of what it is, or say you've got IBS or other things that people always say they have, because it's better just to be honest, as hard as that is, because once the conversation starts, you're in a much better place. And like Jeannelle said, her employer gave her a week off. You just need a reset button sometimes, or just some extra support, or just to be able to deal with that. Yeah. But
yeah, no, thank you, Lyndsey and Jeannelle, for that. That's really positive advice. So we've got another question from Francis. So interesting to hear Jeannelle speak so positively about approaches to mental health nowadays and as a junior member of staff. Do Ben and Lyndsey think this empathy stretches all the way up to more senior staff, or is it still slightly skewed?
As in, does that mean that, do you senior member of staff still get the same kind of, they're allowed to say they're having mental health problems, do you think?
Yeah, possibly, yeah. I think
yes.
go
Okay,
from it from that point. Thanks, Lyndsey.
No, it's okay. Yeah, no, Francis said yes.
Oh yeah, but yeah, thank you, Francis.
I'm not going to completely sugarcoat this, because I think it's super tough. It's not perfect, and there are many companies that aren't doing this really well. And hopefully by having open conversations like this and hearing what we all have to say, more and more people will integrate it into their businesses. And I think it is hard, and I think there is an expectation of you when you're a more senior person to be really resilient and do what you've got to do and deliver and deliver and deliver. And I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and I'm sure that's where a lot of people's anxiety comes from. I know it has in mine in the past, because you want to achieve and you want to be good and you want to be recognised or go up the career ladder. So I do think it's harder, but I do think also, I feel very much like I could directly say to the last 3 bosses that I've had, I've got something going on, and I think, like we just said, if you're honest, they say, for example, I might say to someone, look, why don't you take the rest of the day off? Why don't you go home, get yourself sorted, come back tomorrow, And then before they come back tomorrow, this is a normal world, or meet up with them for a coffee and say, how are you feeling? And it's just that connection, just being a human, just by saying, how are you? And listening to them rather than perhaps doing it all over email. So I think it is, it's a really good question. It's kind of got me thinking. And I think everyone's story is probably different. I don't know if Ben might have a different experience of that.
I think it's a really good question. I think, you know, if I think about my own situation, I've got a great manager who I would feel very happy to just have an honest conversation with if I needed to, and I've known him for quite a few years. So, you know, we've got a good relationship to build on there, and I think that's important. I think Lyndsey, it's hard though, isn't it? When you get further up in an organisation, you are responsible for more people who are looking to you for advice and support, and there are fewer people above you to provide it for you. You know, that's part of what it means to be further up in that organisation. So it's a really good question. Yes, is there enough support when you're facing those issues that may come up, and actually people are looking to you to be holding things up? A good question. Yeah, a good question. I don't know there's an easy answer necessarily.
Thanks both. We've got another question. It's an anonymous attendee. Do you have any advice for getting support for your mental health if you are a freelancer and you don't have a manager or mentor to go to?
Oh, I can definitely answer this one, Iram, if you like.
Yeah, go for it, Lyndsey.
Okay, so I've spent a lot of my life freelancing, and I have to say the freelance community is extremely supportive. So when I was freelancing, I belonged to a number of freelance Facebook groups, which were literally water coolers for having a moan, having a chat, asking for industry advice, asking for like running things past, just like they were your colleagues. So whatever you're into, so for example, anonymous attendee, if you are a writer, for example, there are some brilliant groups for freelance writers. And I belong to freelance PR groups. I belong to freelance, there's one brilliant one called Number One Freelance Media Women, and it is so great for support, being supported by other people, and it's a place where it's extremely empathetic, and you can meet people, you can make friends there. Honestly, it's a great environment. The other thing I would say is, this is a shameless plug, but it would help, is we just published a book called Out of Office, 9 to 5, Quit the 9 to 5 and Be Your Own Boss. It's all about freelancing, by a fantastic author and Instagram sensation, Fiona Thomas. And the book, her background is she became a freelance writer a number of years ago. And the reason she got into freelancing was because she had mental health troubles, which she's been able to overcome and work through. And the book talks about freelancing and mental health. So if anyone wants to reach out to me to get a copy of that, I'm more than happy to send it to them on ebook. And yeah, there are some really great resources out there. And check out Fiona on Instagram as well, Fiona Thomas. Fiona likes to blog, because she is a big cheerleader for freelancers and mental health.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Lyndsey. And we always love a shameless plug. So the next question is from another anonymous attendee. And the question is for Jeannelle. As someone who also experiences social anxiety, I struggle with the thing you mentioned about saying no to things. And I was wondering how you try and tackle the instinct and say yes to everyone all the time.
As in how to like say no, basically.
So you mentioned about saying no to things, and I was wondering how you try and tackle the instinct to say yes to everyone all the time. So yeah, how do you say no more often?
I think you've just kind of got to put yourself first and like understand why you're saying no. If it's literally because, I mean, I guess you don't even need to explain yourself. Like sometimes you're just like really tired, you're really run down, you don't want to join in on that Zoom's call or that Teams call, whatever it is. You can like say no, like in a really polite way. Like, I don't know, hey, is it okay if I give this a miss? It's not like I don't want to spend time with you or whatever, but like I'm feeling drained, or just, hey, is it okay if I give this a miss and we can have a call on Wednesday, or can we reschedule? I feel like there's no like easy way of saying no, but you just kind of have to do it, and maybe like give like an alternative, so it's not as like harsh. So it's not like you're like no and like that's it, but maybe like no, but, or could we, or whatever it is. In terms of like workload, like I feel like I say yes all the time. Like being an assistant, you're just naturally like super keen and you just want to prove yourself to everyone, but that gets really, really overwhelming, and your like priorities get all like messed up when you say yes, and you're often like late on deadlines, and it just kind of makes you look bad. It doesn't make you look as good as you think. So I think it's important to be like, right now I'm at capacity, but maybe towards the end of the week I could help you with that, or is it okay if I get back to you because my like to-do list is looking quite long, or I'm not sure how to do it, but like this person's really good and can help you. So yeah, I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Thank you, Jeannelle. Lyndsey, do you want to add anything?
I'm impressed, Jeannelle.
I know,
You're a wise person. You are so wise. Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say an expression which you can use, which you were almost at, was like, that's not going to work for me right now, or something like that. Or because basically, you know, it's the old expression, you can't pour from an empty cup. If you're completely burnt out and you've got nothing, you can't give. And that means you can't even give to yourself, right? And I think I totally get that, because I'm a real people pleaser as well. Like I find it hard to say no, even like, you know, my experience of all the years of working, because you want to seem keen and enthusiastic, but ultimately you don't want people to think you're just this never-ending, you know, source of being able to just do more and more work. And I think the key to it is, as difficult it is to set boundaries. So always make sure you have a lunch hour when you're working from home. So say your lunch hour is always like 12 to 1 or something, and no matter how tempted you are, do not reply to any emails between 12 and 1, even if you're on your computer or phone. And once you have a deadline, say 5 o'clock when you finish work, don't reply to any emails until the next day. And people will still soon get used to your boundaries, and they'll go, oh, I emailed Lyndsey, but I know she won't reply now till tomorrow. That's cool. That's what she does. But if, like, for example, if I ever work, I'm letting you in on an inside secret. If ever I'm on my computer in the evening and I reply to emails, I never send them, because I don't want to send them to my colleagues and make them think that I expect them to be working in the evening. Like sometimes I might just think, oh, I forgot to do that today. Bish, bash, bosh, go on my computer. But I always save it to draft. And when I get up in the morning, I press send, because I don't want people to think, I expect them to be working. I don't want them to give them that Sunday night dread feeling, which I've had in many jobs, where you're like, oh God, someone's working, I should be working, when you're trying to be watching Netflix. And, you know, it's not productive, and it's not fair on people, and it's not fair on, you know, I'm someone who's suffered a lot of anxiety in life, early on in my career particularly, and that's what that creates, that whole, you've got to be on all the time.
Yeah.
And I think by just putting those boundaries in, people will just learn that that's what you do. And I also think people think, if you are always, if you are emailing people in the evenings, does that mean you can't do your work all in the day? Of course we can't. Work in publishing, our job will never end. But just keep those clear boundaries, because ultimately you're just stressing other people out, I think. And I always am really strict about it. Or if you've got the method of scheduling emails, schedule them out for like 9 o'clock in the morning or something like that.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Lyndsey. I'm very aware that we've gone just over the hour. I've got one last question, and then we'll call it a night for everyone, I think. That this actually links in quite nicely with what you've just mentioned, Lyndsey, about setting boundaries. So do you have any advice if the people you work with aren't supportive of your mental health? For example, expecting you to work unreasonable hours because you are at home?
Yeah, I mean, my heart goes out to you if that is the case. And I mean, I've worked for lots of people like that in the earlier part of my career, when things weren't so probably nice where we work now. Setting the boundaries, And it's so difficult, because I feel for you, because if that's the sort of person you're working with, you probably feel that you don't want to have a conversation with them because you're worried that that might impact on you. It might make you look bad. I'm just imagining, you know, worst case scenario. I think having those clear boundaries in place, I think you can try doing that to begin with, and see how that works. I think being able to work longer hours now and again, if there's something like super deadliney that everyone's in on, but if you're left to feel like you're the only one working, and it depends what unreasonable is, you know, 6, 7 o'clock, I wouldn't call unreasonable now and again. But for example, if it was, you know, working all evening or that kind of thing, when, you know, when I used to work in magazines, and I don't know if it's the same now for the company I used to work for, but they'd pull all-nighters to finish those magazines. And that wasn't great for their mental health. And many of them are very, very sad about that still. I don't think they do it now. But I'd say, you know, just think about, is that, quite honestly, is that the company culture that you want to work in? And do you feel that's the company for you? And I know that's a really big question, because it's a very challenging time right now to be looking for jobs and being employed. But, you know, people treat you like that. It's not great. And there are lots of people out there who would never treat you like that. So bear that in mind. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I think it is. Thank you, Lyndsey. Right, I think we're going to call it a night there, everyone. Lyndsey, Ben, Jeannelle, thanks so much for your time and for your brilliant insight to everything. And thanks to everyone who sent in a question and attended this webinar. It's been recorded, so it will be available. And yeah, feel free to keep in touch, and I'm sure Jeannelle, Lyndsey and Ben would be more than happy to answer questions. Sorry, I'm just volunteering you all now. But yeah, thank you very much, and we'll call it a night. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.